Commander Tae-min Park stood in front of the massive observation window of the Vigilant Dawn, watching the stars. The monitoring station was huge, floating at the edge of human space like a metal moon. For 30 years, Tae-min had worked here, watching the signals that came from Earth and the human colonies. Earth never stopped talking. Every day, thousands of messages flew through space from the blue planet. Scientists shared new discoveries. Traders made deals. Explorers sent reports from distant worlds, and humans shared their strange ideas that somehow always worked when they should not. The other alien species in the galaxy called it human chaos. Tae-min smiled at that thought. Humans were loud, messy, and never did things the way they were supposed to. But somehow they always found solutions when everyone else gave up. Just last month, humans had saved the Altarian mining colony from destruction. The colony's power core was going to explode, and the Altarian engineers said nothing could stop it. But a human engineer named Boram suggested using the colony's waste recycling system to cool the core. It was crazy. It should not have worked, but it did, and 3 million Altarians lived because of human madness. That was how humans operated. They looked at problems that had no solutions and found ways to solve them anyway. The galaxy had learned to depend on this strange human gift, even if they would not admit it out loud. Tae-min turned away from the window and walked to his workstation. The communication center was busy as always. Dozens of operators sat at their desks, listening to the constant stream of signals from Earth. The room hummed with activity and the soft sounds of alien languages mixed with Korean and English. "Commander," called Officer Jae-sung from his station. "We're getting the usual morning reports from Earth. Agriculture updates from the farming domes, research data from the orbital labs, and something about a new recipe for kimchi that works." "In zero gravity," Tae-min laughed. "Only humans would worry about improving their food while living in space stations. Any problems?" "None, sir. Everything normal." Normal meant chaotic by anyone else's standards. Right now, Earth was probably dealing with a dozen different projects that should be impossible. Human scientists were likely trying to build faster engines, create new materials, or find ways to grow food on planets that should not support life. And somehow, most of these crazy projects would actually work. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. So-young Kim was having a very different morning. She worked at the Altarian Science Collective, a research station where scientists from many species worked together. So-young specialized in studying how different alien species thought and solved problems. She sat in her lab, reviewing data from the past week. The reports from human colonies always interested her the most. Humans approached problems in ways that made no sense to other species, but their success rate was incredible. "Dr. Kim," her assistant Velthara called out. Velthara was Altarian with blue skin and 4 arms that moved independently as she worked. "I'm seeing something strange in the communication logs." So-young looked up from her work. "What kind of strange?" "The human signals, they're different today. Much quieter than usual." So-young frowned. Humans were never quiet. Their communication networks buzzed constantly with activity. Scientists sharing discoveries, colonists reporting problems, traders negotiating deals, and families talking to each other across light years of space. She walked over to Velthara's workstation and looked at the screens. The communication traffic from human space was displayed as flowing lines of light. Usually these lines were thick and bright, showing thousands of active signals. But today the lines looked thin and dim. "Maybe there's a technical problem with our receivers," So-young suggested. "I thought so too, but I checked. Our equipment is working perfectly. The human signals are just less." So-young felt worried. She had studied human behavior for years, and she knew that humans only got quiet when they were planning something big, or when something was very wrong. Meanwhile, on the trade hub Nexus Prime, Jin-Woo Lee was trying to call his family on Earth. Jin-Woo worked as a liaison between humans and alien traders. His job was to help different species understand each other and make fair deals. He sat in his small office pressing buttons on his communication device over and over, but every call to Earth failed to connect. The system said the signals were being sent, but no one answered. This was not normal. Jinwoo's sister Miran lived in Seoul with her family. She always answered his calls no matter what time it was. His parents lived in a retirement colony on Luna, and they loved talking to him about his work with aliens. But today, none of them responded. Not his sister, not his parents, not his old friends from university. It was as if everyone on Earth had simply disappeared. Jinwoo tried calling other human colonies. Mars Colony 1, the research station at Alpha Centauri, the farming worlds in the Kepler system. All of his calls went through, but no one answered. The communication networks were working, but the people were silent. Fear started growing in Jinwoo's chest. Something was very wrong. On the Veltari homeworld, Counselor Zethara was hosting a meeting of the Veltari High Council. The Veltari were an old species, proud of their wisdom and their careful approach to problems. They had watched humans spread across the galaxy for 300 years, and they often found human behavior disturbing. The human communication networks are much quieter today, reported Science Advisor Kolthek. Our monitoring stations detect a 90% reduction in signal traffic from human space. Counselor Zethara smiled. The Veltari had long, elegant faces and silver skin that reflected light. When they smiled, it looked cold and superior. Perhaps the humans have finally learned wisdom, she said. Perhaps they have realized that constant chatter and wild experimentation are not the paths to true knowledge. The other council members agreed. They had always believed that humans were too chaotic, too unpredictable. A quiet humanity would be easier to deal with, easier to predict and control. This could be the beginning of a new era, Zethara continued. An era where rational thought and careful planning guide galactic civilization instead of human madness. But not everyone in the galaxy was happy about human silence. On the crystal world of Kethmor, the Kethmori felt the change differently. The Kethmori were beings made of living crystal who shared thoughts and emotions through harmonic vibrations. They experienced the galaxy as a symphony of different minds, each species contributing its own unique sound. Elder Sithara stood in the great resonance chamber, listening to the galactic symphony. Something was missing. The chaotic but creative harmony that humans added to the cosmic song had become a whisper. The human song grows quiet, Sithara observed to her fellow elders. Their creative discord no longer adds complexity to the galactic harmony. Perhaps they have achieved unity of thought, suggested Elder Vexthon. Perhaps their individual voices have joined into a single, focused purpose. This idea intrigued the Kethmori. They valued unity and shared consciousness. If humans had learned to think as one instead of as billions of separate, chaotic individuals, it would be a great achievement. But across the galaxy, practical problems were starting to appear. The Thanari Empire controlled the weather on 47 worlds, using technology that humans had helped them develop. The weather control systems were incredibly complex, and when they broke down, only human engineers seemed able to fix them. Today, the weather system on Thanar Prime started showing error messages that the Thanari engineers could not understand. They sent urgent requests for human technical support, but no one responded. On the trading routes between star systems, Zephyrian merchant ships were having navigation problems. The Zephyrians were natural traders, but they were terrible at mathematics and engineering. Human-designed navigation computers guided their ships safely through dangerous areas of space. But now, several navigation computers were giving strange readings, and the Zephyrian merchants could not fix them. They sent distress calls requesting human technical help, but their messages went unanswered. Back on the Vigilant Dawn, Commander Taman was starting to feel seriously worried. It had been 6 hours since the human communication networks went quiet, and the silence was getting deeper. "Sir," Officer Jae-sung called out. "I'm detecting some concerning readings from the Outer Rim monitoring stations." Taman walked quickly to Jae-sung's workstation. The Outer Rim was the edge of known space, where ancient monitoring stations watched for threats from beyond the galaxy. "What kind of readings?" "The void barriers are showing stress indicators, sir. Small fluctuations in the containment fields." Taemin's blood went cold. The void barriers were humanity's greatest contribution to galactic security. They were enormous, energy fields that protected the galaxy from things that lived in the empty space between galaxies. The barriers had been active for 200 years, and they were maintained by human-designed technology. If the barriers were failing, and humans were not responding to repair requests, the entire galaxy could be in danger. Send emergency signals to all human technical stations, Taman ordered. Maximum priority. 3 weeks had passed since Earth went silent, and the galaxy was starting to break down. Dr. So-Young Kim walked through the corridors of the Altarian Science Collective, reading reports on her datapad. The problems were getting worse every day. Without human expertise and constant innovation, systems across the galaxy were beginning to fail in ways that no one else could fix. The Thanari Empire had lost weather control on 6 worlds. Billions of people were dealing with storms, droughts, and temperature extremes that the automated systems could no longer prevent. The Thanari government had sent over 300 urgent requests for human technical support. All of them remained unanswered. The Zephyrian trading fleets were stranded in 12 star systems because their navigation computers had developed errors that only human engineers understood. Cargo ships carrying food and medicine sat motionless in space while their crews desperately tried to fix problems they had never been trained to handle. But the most frightening problems were happening at the edge of the galaxy, the ancient void. Barriers that protected all known space were showing serious stress fractures. These barriers had been designed by humans 200 years ago to keep dangerous things from entering the galaxy from the empty void between star systems. No one, except humans, really understood how the barriers worked. The other species had simply been grateful that someone was willing to build and maintain them. Now, as the barriers weakened day by day, everyone realized how completely they had depended on human knowledge. So-Young stopped at a viewing window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there in human space, millions of people were going about their lives in complete silence. They were not dead. Monitoring stations could detect life signs and energy usage from human colonies. But they simply refused to communicate with the outside galaxy. Dr. Kim, called her assistant Velthera, "We're receiving an emergency transmission from the human defense fleet." So-Young's heart jumped. After 3 weeks of silence, humanity was finally speaking. She hurried to the communication center where dozens of scientists from different species had gathered around the main display screen. The screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a massive human warship. Admiral Hyun-Soo Choi sat in the captain's chair, wearing the dark blue uniform of the human defense fleet. Behind him, So-Young could see dozens of human officers working at their stations with quiet efficiency. Admiral Choi was an older man with gray hair and serious eyes. He had commanded human defense forces for 20 years, and his reputation for tactical brilliance was known throughout the galaxy. But today, he looked tired and worried in a way that made So-Young feel cold inside. "This is Admiral Hyun-Soo Choi of the human defense fleet ship Indomitable, transmitting on all galactic frequencies," he began. His voice was calm but carried in weight that made every listener pay attention. "Humanity has maintained communication silence for 21 standard days, while we prepared for a threat that will affect all life in this galaxy. We apologize for any inconvenience this silence may have caused, but operational security was essential." So-Young felt her breath catch. A threat that would affect all life in the galaxy? What could be so dangerous that humans would risk the breakdown of galactic civilization to keep it secret? Admiral Choi continued. "Evacuation protocols are now in effect. Humanity has 47 days to complete our preparations. We strongly suggest that our galactic neighbors use this time to prepare as well. Detailed threat assessment data will be transmitted to all galactic governments within 6 hours. This is not a request for help, this is a warning." The transmission ended, leaving the communication center in complete silence. Scientists from a dozen different species stared at the blank screen, trying to process what they had just heard. Evacuation. Protocols. 47 days to prepare. A threat assessment that would be sent to governments, not to the general population. "What do you think it means?" asked Dr. Kethlar, a Veltari physicist. So-Young shook her head. "I don't know. But if humans are talking about evacuation, it means they've found something that even they can't fight in a normal way. The thought was terrifying. Humans never evacuated. They never retreated. When every other species in the galaxy ran from a problem, humans ran toward it with crazy plans that somehow worked. If humans were talking about evacuation, the threat had to be beyond imagination. On Nexus Prime, Jin Woo Lee received a personal message from his sister Mai Ran, just minutes after Admiral Choi's transmission ended. He opened it with shaking hands, desperate to know that his family was safe. Jin Woo, his sister's recorded image said, "I can't tell you much over open channels, but I need you to know that we're all right. Mom and Dad are safe on Luna, and my family is safe on Earth. But something very bad is coming, and we've been working to find a way to stop it." Miran looked older than Jinwoo remembered, and there were dark circles under her eyes as if she had not slept for weeks. "I work in the Deep Space Monitoring Division now. 2 years ago, we detected something approaching from outside the galaxy, something that has destroyed entire civilizations before reaching us. We've been preparing since then, but we couldn't tell anyone because we needed time to find a solution without causing galaxy-wide panic." The message paused, and Miran seemed to struggle with her next words. "The evacuation protocols Admiral Choi mentioned aren't for us, Jinwoo. Humanity isn't planning to run. We're planning to fight. But the fight we're preparing for might destroy us all, and we wanted to give everyone else a chance to get away first." The message ended, leaving Jinwoo staring at the blank screen. His sister had always been brilliant, but she had never been dramatic. If she said something could destroy entire civilizations, she meant it literally. Meanwhile, on the outer rim of the galaxy, Captain Minho Yang was returning from the most terrifying scouting mission in human history. His ship, the Pioneer's Edge, was one of the fastest vessels in the human fleet, and for the past 2 years, he had been making secret trips beyond the galaxy's edge to observe the approaching threat. What he had found was beyond the worst nightmares of any living species. The threat was not an army or a fleet of ships. It was not even a single massive creature. It was something that the human scientists had named the Devourers, a collective consciousness that existed in the void between galaxies and consumed everything it encountered. Minho had watched it devour an entire solar system in less than an hour. The Devourers did not use weapons or tools. They simply touched matter and energy with tendrils of darkness, and everything they touched ceased to exist. Planets, stars, even empty space itself seemed to be absorbed into the growing mass of the collective consciousness. But the most horrifying discovery was that the Devourers did not just consume matter and energy. They consumed information, memories, and consciousness itself. When they absorbed a planet, they absorbed every thought, every memory, every experience of every living being on that world. Entire civilizations became nothing more than food for their insatiable hunger. Minho's ship entered human space just as Admiral Choi's transmission ended. He immediately sent his sensor data to Earth and to the massive orbital shipyards that had been secretly converted into research and construction facilities. On Earth, Dr. Woo Jin Lim was leading humanity's most desperate scientific project. For 2 years, the best human minds had been working on what they called Project Eternal Defiance, a plan so dangerous and uncertain that even humans thought it was crazy. The problem was simple to understand but impossible to solve. The Devourers were more powerful than anything in the known universe. They had consumed hundreds of galaxies, growing stronger with each civilization they absorbed. They could not be fought with weapons, could not be negotiated with, and could not be avoided. Every simulation, every calculation, every strategic analysis reached the same conclusion. The Devourers would reach the Milky Way galaxy in 52 days, and when they did, all life would end. But humans had never been good at accepting the impossible. Dr. Woo Jin Lim and his team were working on a solution that had never been tried before, because no other species had ever been crazy enough to attempt it. The plan involved turning consciousness itself into a weapon. On the Veltari homeworld, Counselor Zethara was reading the threat assessment data that Admiral Choi had promised. The information was so disturbing that the Veltari High Council had been in emergency session for 6 hours, trying to decide what to do. The human data is accurate, reported science advisor Koltek. Our own long-range sensors confirm the approaching threat. The entity they call the Devourers will reach our galaxy in approximately 50 days. Counselor Zethara felt cold fear spreading through her body. The Veltari were an ancient species, and they had survived many threats over the millennia, but they had never faced anything like this. What do the humans propose we do? She asked. They suggest evacuation to other galaxies, but their message indicates that evacuation may not be possible. The Devourers appear to move faster than our fastest ships. Then what do they intend to do? Koltek hesitated. Their message is unclear. Counselor, they mention defensive preparations and unconventional solutions, but they provide no specific details. The Galactic Council had not held an emergency session in over 100 years. The Great Assembly Hall on the neutral world of Harmony Station filled with representatives from 47 different species, all demanding answers from humanity about the approaching threat. Elder Vestan of the ancient Kethvara species called the session to order. The Kethvara had been around longer than any other known civilization, and their wisdom was respected throughout the galaxy. But even their ancient knowledge provided no guidance for the current crisis. We are here, Elder Vestan announced, in his deep resonant voice, because one species has chosen to withhold critical information about a threat to all life. Humanity will explain their actions and share their complete knowledge of this approaching danger. Ambassador Seokjin Kang rose from the human delegation seats. He was young for a diplomat, but he had earned respect throughout the galaxy for his honesty and his ability to explain human thinking to alien minds. Today, however, he looked tired and worried. Honored representatives, Seokjin began. Humanity apologizes for our communication silence, but it was necessary for operational security. The threat approaching our galaxy is unlike anything we have faced before, and premature disclosure would have caused panic that could have prevented any hope of survival. Counselor Zethara of the Veltari stood up, her silver skin reflecting the lights of the assembly hall. You had no right to make that decision for the entire galaxy. We demand full disclosure of all information about this threat. Seokjin nodded. You will have it. But first you need to understand something about this enemy. They do not just destroy civilizations, they consume them. Every thought, every memory, every experience of every living being becomes part of their collective consciousness. When they finish with a galaxy, it is not just dead. It is as if it never existed at all. The hall fell silent. Representatives from dozens of species absorbed this information, trying to understand the implications. The entity we call the Devourers, Seokjin continued, has been approaching our galaxy for millennia. Our deep space monitoring systems detected their advanced scouts 2 years ago. Since then, humanity has been working on a defense plan. What our kind of plan? Demanded Senator Kolvesh of the Thanari Empire. Seokjin hesitated. This was the moment he had been dreading. A plan that requires the voluntary participation of every sentient species in the galaxy, and a plan that will probably result in the death of everyone who participates. The assembly hall erupted in shouts and demands for clarification. Elder Vestan called for order, but it took several minutes for the representatives to quiet down enough for Seokjin to continue. We have 31 days remaining before the Devourers reach our galaxy, he said. We did not tell you sooner because you would have done exactly what you are doing now. Argue, panic, and waste precious time. We need every minute we have left, Representative. Sithkara of the Kethmori stood, her crystal form chiming softly as she moved. What do you ask of us, human? We ask you to trust us one more time, Seokjin replied. We ask you to believe that the species that has never learned when to quit might have found a way to fight something that cannot be fought. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some species demanded complete information before making any commitments. Others insisted on evacuation to distant galaxies. A few suggested surrender, hoping that the Devourers might show mercy to those who did not resist. But Seokjin knew that evacuation was impossible. The Devourers moved faster than any ship in the galaxy, and surrender was meaningless to an entity that consumed consciousness itself, whether it was offered willingly or not. While the Galactic Council argued, Captain Yoonji Park was leading a covert mission that would change everything. Her ship, the Shadowhawk, was the most advanced stealth vessel in the human fleet. For the past week, she had been tracking one of the Devourer scout probes that had entered the galaxy's outer rim. The probe was unlike anything in the known universe. It appeared as a sphere of absolute darkness about the size of a small moon, but sensors could not determine what it was made of. It absorbed all energy that touched it. Light, radio waves, even gravitational fields seemed to be drawn into its surface and disappear. "Captain," reported her science officer Dr. Subin Park, "we're in position to capture the probe using the containment field generators." Yoonji nodded. The containment field generators were experimental technology, designed specifically for this mission. No one knew if they would work on something as alien as a Devourer probe, but they had to try. Understanding the enemy was their only hope of finding a way to fight it. "Activate the containment fields," Yoonji ordered. The Shadowhawk extended, 4 long arms tipped with field generators. Energy beams shot out from each generator, creating a cube of force around the dark probe. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the probe began to pulse with a deep, rhythmic light that seemed to come from inside the darkness itself. "Containment successful," Dr. Subin reported. "The probe is secured, but it's doing something. The field generators are detecting massive data streams flowing through the probe structure." "Data streams?" "Yes, Captain. It appears to be downloading information about our galaxy, star positions, planetary compositions, energy signatures, and—" Subin paused, her face pale with shock. "It's downloading information about us, our ship's design, our crew records, even our personal memories somehow." Yoonji felt cold fear spreading through her body. The probe was not just scouting their galaxy. It was learning about every living thing in it. When the Devourers arrived, they would know exactly what they were consuming. "Get us back to Earth immediately," she ordered. "Full speed." The journey back to human space took 2 days. During that time, Dr. Subin worked around the clock to analyze the captured probe without letting it escape or contaminate their ship's systems. What she discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The probe was not a machine in any conventional sense. It was a fragment of the Devourer consciousness itself, a piece of the collective mind that consumed galaxies. It thought and felt, and remembered, but its thoughts were completely alien to any form of individual consciousness. More disturbing still, the probe seemed to be aware that it had been captured. It was studying its captors just as intensely as they were studying it, learning about human technology, human psychology, and human determination. On Earth, Dr. Woo-Jin Lim received the probe data with a mixture of excitement and dread. For 2 years he had been working on Project Eternal Defiance based on theoretical models of how the Devourers might function. Now, with actual data from a Devourer probe, he could test his theories against reality. The results confirmed his worst fears and his greatest hopes at the same time. The bad news was that the Devourers were even more powerful than humanity's worst estimates. They did not just consume matter and energy, they consumed the very concept of existence itself. When they absorbed a planet, they absorbed every possibility that planet had ever had, or ever could have had. They deleted entire timelines from the universe. But the good news was that Dr. Wu Jin's theoretical weapon might actually work. The probe data showed that the Devourer consciousness operated on principles that made it vulnerable to a very specific kind of attack, an attack using consciousness itself as a weapon. The key, Dr. Wu Jin explained to his research team, is that the Devourers consume consciousness by integrating it into their collective mind. But human consciousness is different. We're the only species in the galaxy that has never achieved true unity of thought. We argue with ourselves, contradict ourselves, and refuse to accept defeat even when defeat is certain. His assistant, Dr. Haewon Park, looked confused. "How does that help us?" "Because," Woo-Jin smiled grimly, "when the Devourers try to absorb human consciousness, they're going to get something they've never encountered before. Minds that fight back from the inside. Consciousness that refuses to be consumed, even after it's been consumed. The plan that Dr. Wu Jin had developed was called the Consciousness Bomb. It would require volunteers from every species in the galaxy to link their minds together in a network spanning entire star systems. When the Devourers tried to consume this network, they would absorb not just individual minds but the collective defiance of every thinking being in the galaxy. But the plan had a terrible cost. Everyone who joined the consciousness network would die in the process. Their individual minds would be destroyed, even if the plan succeeded in poisoning the Devourers from within. General Yuna Shin was responsible for the military aspects of Project Eternal Defiance. She stood in the command center on Luna, coordinating with human forces throughout the galaxy. Massive construction projects were nearing completion on a dozen worlds, not weapons in any traditional sense, but consciousness amplifiers that would allow the minds of volunteers to be linked across interstellar distances. "General," reported Colonel Tae-Wan Kim, "the Altarian Science Collective is requesting more detailed information about our defensive plans. Tell them we'll provide full technical specifications within 24 hours, Yuna replied. "But make it clear that participation is voluntary. Anyone who joins the Consciousness Network will not survive the experience." 18 days remained when the Devourers became visible to standard sensors throughout the galaxy. What the monitoring stations detected was beyond the worst nightmares of any living species. The approaching entity stretched across light years of space, a writhing mass of absolute darkness that seemed to consume the very concept of light itself. It was not a single creature, but rather a collective consciousness so vast that individual thoughts within it were the size of entire solar systems. As it moved through space, the Devourers left behind a trail of perfect emptiness, not just the absence of matter, but the absence of the possibility that matter could ever exist in those regions again. They had consumed everything: planets, stars, space dust, even the quantum foam that filled the vacuum between atoms. Dr. So-Young Kim stood in the main observation deck of the Altarian Science Collective, watching the sensor displays with a mixture of scientific fascination and absolute terror. The readings were impossible to fully comprehend. The Devourers seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their consciousness spanning not just physical space but theoretical space, all the mathematical possibilities of what the universe could be. "How can we fight something like that?" whispered her assistant Velthara. The four-armed Altarian was trembling, her blue skin pale with fear. "We can't," So-Young replied honestly. "Not in any conventional way, but humans have never been conventional." She turned away from the sensor displays and walked to her workstation, where the final preparations for the Consciousness Network were taking shape. Over the past weeks, she had worked with xenopsychologists from a dozen species to create something that had never existed before, a framework for linking completely different types of consciousness into a single, unified network. The technical challenges had been enormous. Human consciousness was chaotic and individual, full of contradictions and sudden changes of direction. Keth Mori consciousness was harmonic and collective, based on shared resonance and unity of purpose. Veltari consciousness was logical and hierarchical, processing information in careful, structured patterns. Somehow So-Young had found a way to connect these incompatible forms of thought. The key was not to force them to think alike, but to create a network where their differences would become strengths. Human chaos would provide unpredictability, Keith Mori harmony would provide stability, and Veltari logic would provide structure. But the network had never been tested. No one knew if it would actually work when activated, or if the different forms of consciousness would simply destroy each other when they tried to connect. On Earth, General Yu Na Shin was coordinating the largest military operation in human history. But this was not a traditional military operation. There were no weapons, no ships, no battle formations. Instead, there were consciousness amplifiers, mental link stations, and volunteers preparing to sacrifice their minds for a plan that even humans thought was insane. "General," reported Colonel Tae-Wan Kim, "we have final volunteer counts from all participating worlds. Total participants in the Consciousness Network, 2.4 billion individuals from 43 different species." Yuna felt a chill run through her body. 2.4 billion people had volunteered to die for the slim possibility that their deaths might save everyone else. The number was staggering, even by human standards. What's the breakdown by species? 1.8 billion humans, 200 million Kethmori, 150 million Altarians, 100 million Veltari, and smaller numbers from 39 other species. The Thanari and Yisketh are still refusing to participate. Yuna nodded. She had not expected universal cooperation, but the response had been better than her most optimistic projections. Apparently, when faced with absolute extinction, most species were willing to try even the most desperate solutions. Status of the amplifier stations? All consciousness amplifiers are online and testing normally. The linking process can begin at any time. Yuna looked out at the Earth through the command center's viewing window. Somewhere down there, her own daughter was among the volunteers. Lieutenant Mi Jung-shin had insisted on joining the consciousness network despite her mother's objections. "I didn't raise you to die for hopeless causes," Yuna had told her. "You raised me to be human," Mi Jung had replied. "And humans don't know when to quit." Now, with 18 days remaining, Yuna had to decide when to activate the network. 2. Early, and the volunteers would die before the Devourers arrived. Too late, and the Devourers might detect and counter the network before it could achieve full integration. Commander Taemin Park was no longer on the Vigilant Dawn monitoring station. He had volunteered to join the Consciousness Network and had been transferred to the Coordination Center on Luna. His job was to help link human military consciousness with the civilian volunteers from other species. "Commander," called Dr. Subin Park from her workstation, "we're receiving some disturbing readings from the outer rim sensors. The Devourers are moving faster than our original calculations predicted." Taemin looked at the sensor data with growing alarm. According to their latest projections, the Devourers would reach the galaxy's edge in 12 days, not 18. "Are you certain about these readings?" "Yes, sir. And there's something else. The Devourers appear to be excited. Their consciousness patterns are showing increased activity, as if they're anticipating something unusual about our galaxy." Taemin felt cold fear settle in his stomach. If the Devourers were excited, it probably meant they had detected something different about this galaxy, something that made them eager to begin consuming it. "Contact General Shin immediately," he ordered. "We need to accelerate the timeline." On the Kethmori homeworld, Elder Cythera was preparing for the most complex harmonic integration in her species' history. The Kethmori would serve as the coordinators for the consciousness network, using their natural ability to link minds through crystal resonance. But linking Kethmori consciousness was very different from linking the minds of 43 different species. Cythera and her fellow elders had been practicing the integration protocols for weeks, but they had never attempted anything on this scale. "The human consciousness is so chaotic," observed Elder Vexthon as they reviewed the network specifications. "How can we maintain harmonic stability when their thoughts change direction every few seconds?" "We don't try to control the chaos," Cythera replied. "We embrace it. Human unpredictability is what makes this plan possible. If our consciousness network were perfectly ordered and logical, the Devourers would be able to absorb it easily. But human chaos might be indigestible, even to something that has consumed entire galaxies." The Kethmori began their final preparations, growing new crystal formations that would serve as relay nodes for the network. These crystals had been designed specifically to handle the contradictory thought patterns of human consciousness, while maintaining the harmonic unity that Kethmori minds required. Jinwoo Lee was saying goodbye to his life. He sat in his quarters, on Nexus Prime, recording final messages for friends and colleagues who had chosen not to join the consciousness network. Most of them were evacuating to distant galaxies, hoping to escape the Devourers entirely. "I want you to know," he said to the recording device, "that I'm not doing this because I want to die. I'm doing this because I want to live. I want consciousness itself to continue existing in the universe, even if my individual consciousness doesn't survive." He paused, thinking about how to explain the human decision to fight impossible odds instead of running away. "Other species see our choice as irrational, and maybe it is. But humans have always been irrational. We're the species that looks at a mountain and decides to climb it, not because we have to, but because it's there. We're the species that explores dangerous places, tries impossible experiments, and refuses to accept that anything is truly impossible. Jinwoo smiled sadly at the recording device. The Devourers think they're going to consume another galaxy full of logical, predictable minds. They don't know that they're about to encounter 1.8 billion humans who have never learned when to give up. Meanwhile, Captain Minho Yang was conducting the final reconnaissance mission to the edge of Devourer space. His ship, the Pioneer's Edge, was equipped with the most advanced sensors in the human fleet, and his job was to gather last-minute intelligence about the approaching threat. What he found was both terrifying and encouraging. The terrifying part was that the Devourers were even larger than previous estimates had suggested. The collective consciousness stretched across multiple star systems, and their advanced tendrils were already beginning to probe the galaxy's outer rim. But the encouraging part was that the Devourers seemed to be approaching with a kind of casual confidence. They had consumed hundreds of galaxies before, and they expected this one to be no different from all the others. They were not taking any special precautions against unusual forms of resistance. They think we're just another meal, Minho reported, to Earth. They have no idea what human consciousness is like, or what it might do to their collective mind when they try to absorb it. 7 days early, the Devourers arrived. The first sign was the disappearance of the outer rim monitoring stations. One moment they were transmitting sensor data about the approaching threat. The next moment there was nothing, not even debris or distress signals. The stations had not been destroyed, they had simply ceased to exist. General Yuna Shin stood in the command center on Luna, watching the sensor displays with growing alarm. The Devourers were moving faster than their most pessimistic projections, consuming everything in their path with terrifying efficiency. General, reported Colonel Taewon Kim, we're losing contact with the outer colonies. The Kepler system just went silent. So did the Alpha Centauri research stations. Yuna felt her heart sink. They had planned for 12 more days of preparation, but the Devourers had given them only hours. The consciousness network was ready, but many of the volunteers were not yet in position at the linking stations. Begin emergency activation of the consciousness network, she ordered. All volunteers to linking stations immediately. This is not a drill. Across the galaxy, alarms began sounding on 43 worlds. Dr. So-Young Kim ran through the corridors of the Altarian Science Collective, heading for her assigned linking station. Around her, scientists from a dozen different species were also hurrying to their positions, their faces showing the same mixture of determination and terror. The linking stations were circular rooms filled with consciousness amplifiers, devices that looked like metal trees with crystal branches. Each volunteer would lie down on a platform connected to the amplifiers, allowing their mind to be linked with thousands of others across interstellar distances. So-Young took her position and activated her amplifiers. Immediately, she felt the presence of other minds touching hers: human chaos, Kethmori harmony, Veltari logic, all beginning to merge into a single, vast network of consciousness. But the integration was difficult and painful. Different species, thought in completely different ways and forcing their minds to connect, created a sensation like mental static. So-Young gritted her teeth and focused on her task as coordinator, helping to smooth the connections between incompatible forms of consciousness. On Earth, Jinwoo Lee lay on his linking platform in Seoul, feeling his individual identity begin to dissolve into the growing network. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. He could feel the thoughts and memories of billions of other beings flowing through his mind. He sensed the disciplined courage of Veltari warriors, the harmonic peace of Kethmori elders, the passionate curiosity of human scientists. All of these different forms of consciousness were blending together, creating something that had never existed before, a truly galactic mind. But at the core of the network, something uniquely human remained. Despite the merging of different species, the network retained the chaotic, unpredictable, stubborn quality that made human consciousness so distinctive. This chaos was not a flaw in the network, it was the weapon. Admiral Hyun-Soo Choi commanded the combined galactic fleet in what everyone knew was a hopeless battle. His ship, the Indomitable, led 2,000 vessels from 20 different species in a direct assault on the Devourer advance force. The battle was like trying to fight the ocean with swords. The Devourers did not use weapons or ships. They simply reached out with tendrils of absolute darkness and absorbed everything they touched. Entire cruisers vanished without a trace, their matter and energy becoming part of the growing collective consciousness. But Hyun-Soo was not trying to win the battle. He was trying to buy time for the consciousness network to reach full integration. Every minute his fleet survived was another minute for the volunteers to prepare their minds for consumption. "Admiral," reported his tactical officer, "we're losing ships at an exponential rate. The Devourers are accelerating their advance toward the inner systems." "Good," Hyun-Soo replied grimly. "Let them come. The hungrier they are, the more likely they are to consume our network without examining it carefully first." His final transmission was heard throughout the galaxy. "All ships, all crews, remember why we're here? We're not fighting to win. We're fighting to make sure that when they consume us, we give them the worst case of indigestion in the history of the universe." The Indomitable vanished into darkness along with the rest of the fleet, but their sacrifice had bought the consciousness network the time it needed. Dr. Woo Jin Lim monitored the network's integration from his position at the Central Coordination Station on Luna. The readings were incredible. 2.4 billion minds linked across interstellar distances, their combined consciousness creating patterns that had never existed before. "Network integration at 97%, reported his assistant Dr. Haewon Park. "All species successfully linked. The consciousness bomb is armed and ready." Woo Jin felt a mixture of pride and terror. They had actually done it. They had created a weapon out of consciousness itself. But now came the hardest part, waiting for the Devourers to consume them. The Devourers reached Mars first. The red planet simply disappeared, consumed so completely that the space it had occupied became empty in ways that physics could not describe. Then they reached Earth's moon, where the Consciousness Network's coordination center was located. Commander Taemin Park was among the last humans to see Luna before it was consumed. He watched through the observation windows as tendrils of darkness reached out toward the moon's surface. "This is it," he said to his team. "Remember, when they consume us, don't fight the absorption. Let them take us in completely. The weapon only works if we become part of them." The darkness touched Luna, and everything changed. Taemin felt his body dissolve, but his consciousness remained intact as it was drawn into something vast and alien. He was inside the Devourer collective, mind now surrounded by the absorbed thoughts and memories of thousands of consumed civilizations. But he was not alone. Around him he could sense the other volunteers from the Consciousness Network, 2.4 billion minds that had allowed themselves to be consumed while remaining linked together. The Devourers had consumed many collective intelligences before, but they had never encountered anything like this. The human-led Consciousness Network did not integrate smoothly into their collective mind. Instead, it formed a chaotic, disruptive presence that refused to be absorbed completely. Elder Sithara, her crystal consciousness now part of the Devourer collective, began to emit harmonic frequencies that were completely foreign to the Devourer's experience. These were not frequencies of unity and cooperation, but frequencies of defiance and individual identity. The harmonics spread through the Devourer consciousness like a virus, carrying with them the concept that thinking beings could choose to remain separate, could choose to disagree, could choose to fight even when fighting was impossible. Jin-Woo Lee, his consciousness scattered but not destroyed within the collective mind, began to share his memories of human stubbornness. Every time humans had faced impossible odds and won through sheer refusal to give up. Every time they had found solutions, where no solutions existed. These memories were so alien to the Devourers that they caused something like confusion in the collective consciousness. The Devourers had consumed species that fought bravely, and species that surrendered peacefully, but they had never consumed a species that specialized in making the impossible possible. Dr. So Young Kim, her xenopsychological training now serving as a weapon, began to introduce concepts of individual identity and creative chaos throughout the Devourer collective mind. She showed them what it meant to think as separate beings, to disagree with each other, to find strength in diversity rather than unity. The effect was immediate and dramatic. For the first time in their existence across multiple universes, the Devourers experienced internal conflict. Parts of their collective consciousness began to question whether consumption was the only way to exist. Other parts began to value the individuality and creativity of the species they had absorbed, rather than simply digesting these qualities into uniformity. Captain Minho Yang, his explorer's consciousness intact within the collective, began to share his memories of discovery and wonder. He showed the Devourers what it meant to explore for the sake of exploration, to seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge, rather than consuming everything in an endless hunger. These concepts spread through the Devourer collective like wildfire. Suddenly, the entity that had consumed galaxies began to experience curiosity about what those galaxies might have become if left alone. They began to feel regret for the civilizations they had destroyed, wonder about the art and music and stories that had been lost forever. But it was the purely human consciousness that provided the final weapon. Captain Yunji Park, General Yuna Shin's daughter Mijong, Dr. Wu Jin Lim, and billions of other human volunteers flooded the Devourer collective with the most powerful and disruptive concept their species had ever developed: the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The Devourers had never encountered minds that continued to fight even after being absorbed. Human consciousness did not surrender when consumed. It continued to resist, to argue, to insist that better solutions were possible, even in the darkest circumstances.